The COVID hoax has been exposed. The United States government, through its military research programs, created a synthetic poison and told you that there was an epidemic, a pandemic actually, of a novel, scary flu. That's called gain of function, when you create mechanisms of illness that do not happen in the world naturally. They used it to make people sick in various geographic locations around the world, which ginned up just the right amount of fear to introduce a real weapon of mass destruction, a synthetic, lab-created, genetic Frankenstein molecule called the mRNA biological weapon. But there was never really a flu virus. And once you understand the fraud, you'll be able to see who the real criminals are. This is the Dr. Jane Ruby Show, and you're about to enter Truth in Medicine. Welcome to the Dr. Jane Ruby Show on this Wednesday, October 22nd, 2025. Well, what you just saw was a rapid antigen test being used to test for COVID-19 flu, the virus that has never been identified or proven to exist by legitimate scientific isolation and purification in its whole form from an ill individual or animal, and the test coming up positive. Well, recently, Jamie Andrews and his team at the control group 50 Scientists was here on the Dr. Jane Ruby Show to introduce the proper testing for isolation in order to prove whether or not there is a virus. And if you haven't seen that first interview, you can find it in my Rumble channel and as a continued live stream replay on my Twitter and Telegram accounts. Tonight, we're going to take a more technical look at the work that this group has done. The Control Group 50 Scientists have been conducting. Scientists who are sick and tired of watching illegitimate procedures being used to gaslight the public into believing that they did a real isolation test and that the SARS viruses exist. I've asked Jamie to return to the show tonight for a second interview to look at these techniques, discuss what's been done legitimately in the past to lie to the public, illegitimately, I should say, to the public, and give all of us a better understanding now of what really good science actually is. As with the COVID vaccines or any vaccines in the United States particularly, our government has allowed these companies to literally get away with murder. A placebo is actually an inert, inactive, benign material designed to be disguised as the real thing. It's the only legitimate way to rule out other confounding factors when you're testing something new. The companies and the government have conducted this fraud by using other poisonous injection vaccines as their placebo because this obfuscates and hides the real safety signals. They could never justify releasing these into the public if they used a real placebo. Using another poisonous vaccine is actually a different type of study called a head-to-head, and that's not appropriate to determine the safety, especially in entities that have never been introduced before to the human body. And with that said, I'd like to welcome Jamie back to the show for this very important second discussion. Jamie, great to have you back on the show. Thanks for being here again.
Hi, Dr. Ruby. Thank you very much for having me back. It's great to be back and to get stuck into it a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've been out there doing your due diligence, getting this word out, getting this decent, legitimate science out. And we'll talk about what your experience has been out there in the real world, because it's kind of rough some days. But anyway, but you're doing a great job. And it's an important message, Jamie, because it really blows open the COVID hoax, in my opinion.
Thank you.
In the first show, you pretty much laid out what the team is about, how it came about, how you got involved, your leadership, and what you're trying to accomplish. So I mentioned that in the introduction so that people will go back and watch that. It's a really nice dovetail into tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I want to turn it over to you. I know you've brought some visuals tonight. You're going to talk us through what the team has done that led you to be able to say publicly now for quite a while that there is no SARS-CoV-2 virus. And in fact, there is likely no such thing as a naturally occurring virus in the wild that makes people sick, especially requiring vaccines. So, yeah.
Oh, certainly. I mean, that's the fundamental reason why we're doing it is so that people understand that not only are vaccines dangerous, but they're not needed at all. Yeah, when you understand the fraud of virology, it really dispels the fear and the mysticism behind. A lot of people can see that vaccines do damage, they do harm. The childhood vaccine schedule. When people are going in and they're seeing their children, react to these things, they call it, side effects or that's how the vaccine is working. People intuitively are realizing that, which is fantastic. But to go even further, when you fully understand that they're not even needed, because you can come away with a kind of anti-vax stance that always in the back of your mind, okay, maybe what if I'm not taking it, so I'm not having the risk of getting damaged. But until you actually understand that there is no threat to start off with, that's when you really become empowered and really can fight this thing properly. So at the Virology Control Studies Project, that's what we're trying to do, is demystify this. And as you showed the video, I mean, it's a little bit of fun, really. The rapid antigen test, the lateral flow test, is really crap. It's just a wicking piece of paper. And but there are millions and millions of people during 2020 that were logging their supposed symptoms based on these tests. And I did about 100 of these tests. I mean, they were giving them out free. The government were giving them out free in 2020. And actually the idea really came from a group of British school children who were using them to they were using Coca-Cola to put on them. They were testing positive to get off school. So it was quite ingenious. Kids have a wonderful way of of finding these things out. Is that they just wanted to get off school. They didn't want to be in a mask. They didn't want to get sent to these indoctrination camps, and they figured it out all themselves. So clever young people there, and really they set off an interest, to actually debunk these tests in general, not just the lateral flow test, but the PCR tests and genomic sequencing. But as you've shown, I put it out on Twitter, and people intrinsically know, they instinctively know that these tests are junk. But when you can actually see them in real life, or on video, and I would encourage people, if you have still got some in your kitchen drawer or whatever that came from 2020, just go and try for yourself. Don't trust me that this thing does actually work, because it does. I tested over 100, and it came back positive maybe 20 or 30 times. Once you find certain things that do, they test positive every time. So alcohols, a lot of sodas, I had yeast as well. And one of the interesting things is you immediately get the rebuttal. So acids break them, or ethanols break them. And so I tried lemon juice as well, which has acid pH, about the same acid as a soda, and the lemon juice tested negative. So you can categorically say that it's not the acid that's breaking them, because we tested other acid products too. So it's not the ethanol content that breaks them, because some of the alcohols that I tested positive for just one or two, because they were multiplex. They were three supposed viruses: COVID, SARS, flu A and flu B. And so some of them only tested positive for flu A, or only tested positive for SARS-CoV-2. So that it's not just breaking them. It's not just the equivalent, the equivalent of painting a red line on it and going, I've faked this test.
Right.
It is actually measuring something.
Yeah, I want to ask you a couple of questions. Let me just clarify for the audience. Did you use any PCR tests per se, in addition to the rapid antigen test, for fun on this?
Yes, I have. I've yet to release the results.
Okay. All right.
There's a kind of home test, and I will do this, because they're making it a lot more accessible to people. It's called a NAT, NAAT, which is a type of PCR test. They use the PCR reagents, the exact ones that are used in the big labs, but it's more like a home test. But I have done almost identically these things with the PCR test as to the lateral flow test, and received some similar results.
So that's a good cliffhanger. We'll wait until you come back a third time to give us the results of those PCRs. And the reason I'm asking is because I wanted to establish, for example, that the lateral flow rapid antigen test, is it diagnostic, or at least allegedly diagnostic, supposedly, for anything? Or is
the thing about a lateral flow test is that even within the mainstream, they defer to the PCR test. So if you get a lateral flow test, it tests positive, but then you have a PCR test and it tests negative, the PCR test overrides the
okay. Why did you choose the lateral flow rapid antigen for this demonstration?
Just because it's easy. It's very easy, because you get the strip. It's like a pregnancy test, right? The strip comes up and you can see it. It's all within a minute. So a 2-minute Twitter video, as opposed to the PCR test, which takes about 20 minutes for the results to come through. It's not so it's not just a light that comes on and says, "Oh, you're positive," or anything. You have to kind of interpret the data. There's a graphical readout and so on and so forth. So it just makes for cleaner content. Really, just a social media type thing, and
it's part of what people would get from their local pharmacy store, or whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
I want a COVID test. Boom, they might get
it's the real kind of front of house, and people are taking these things and then submitting themselves to the medical authorities. And once you've kind of onboarded yourself to the medical authorities, then we both know how bad that is. You're kind of signing away yourself away to the hospitals, and that you're at their whim, where they pump you full of remdesivir or put you on a ventilator, or so on and so forth. So it really is.
The reason I'm asking is because I wanted to know if it had had been validated as a diagnostic for anything. But what is it generally used for, if not to fake the positives of COVID? What else is it?
Well, it's anything where they claim that it's antigenic. I mean, I'm not aware of anything other than viruses being used. I don't think
so it's a gross
used
marker.
for any other pathogen, which is why I think within the mainstream they don't really pay much attention to them. I mean, there's published and peer-reviewed papers where they test positive with mineral water. So it's that's quite how bad they are. But not enough people know this. I see people on Twitter daily, saying, I got sick, I took one of these tests and I tested positive for this or that. And it's just raising awareness that very first front of house is garbage. So
tonight we're going to focus on, thank you for those clarifications. That's important because the public does not have the expertise necessarily. So let's go into what your content. We promised them in the first interview that you would explain the beginning explanation of how you've come to the conclusion that there is no SARS-CoV-2 virus, and there probably isn't any other kind of flu virus. Okay, it's something else. So take us through what you brought tonight and what you wanted to share, if you could.
Yeah, so these are the clip back results of this is actually the second time we've done it. This is the verification of the isolation protocol. So if I could just go from ground up of saying what the isolation is, why it's so important within virology, and then what our experiment is. So virologists say that you can't just take a sample and get virus from that sample, specifically not in the first instance. So when you want to isolate a virus, so they claim that if something, you have the symptomology of a cold, in this case with COVID or SARS-CoV-2, and they say, okay, so this must be a respiratory virus, but we need to find out what type of respiratory virus this is. They can't just take your spit or your snot or your the fluid on your chest, which is called BALF or bronchoalveolar lavage. They can't just take it and take the virus from there. They can't just spin it down and say, here's your virus, because they say that there's not enough for some reason. They can do that with bacteria, but they can't do that with the virus. What they claim that they have to do is called culturing. So they put in a Petri dish, they take the sample and they take a cell line, which is taken from an animal or a human. It's not particularly nice. This clinical research is really quite barbaric, a little bit, like Fauci with testing on beagles and all sorts. They tend to do a lot of torturing and of mice and things like that. And so these cell lines, they take them from, unfortunately, human embryonic kidney cells, so abortive fetal lines. They take them from tumors, cancerous tumors that will cut out of people, and they freeze them. They freeze them to do research on later, so that they claim, and I don't agree with this, but they claim that if they can make something in a Petri dish work, so if they can, say, kill the cell line in a Petri dish, then that means that it's indicative, or it represents what's going on in the body. Whereas I don't think that it necessarily does. I think that the whole of a person is a much different, I wouldn't want to be, and I don't think that you would want to be broken down into what is going on in a Petri dish. But that's kind of aside. This is what the virologists do, is that they take these cells, they grow them. So you can, once you cut them out of somebody, if you cryogenically freeze them, you can then grow them in a Petri dish once again. So you take a tiny sample, you put it in a Petri dish, and then you put what's called fetal bovine serum, or FBS, which is the blood from around the outside of a baby cow. And they use this fetal bovine serum to grow the cells. It's a nutrient source. It's a food source for the cells. They absorb it and they grow, and these cells replicate. So they put the cells in a petri dish, they grow them out, and once these cells are healthy and they are surviving in a stabilized environment, then they add what they consider to be a sample that contains a virus. So they'll add snot or mucus or whatever. And when they see these cells die, they say, a virus is causing the cells
That's
to
all
die.
it is? That's all it is.
That's all it is.
And then they tell the public, we've got a virus, and then they go and the pharmaceutical company creates a vaccine that matches that variant, right?
I mean, to put it into perspective as well, all of the quote unquote vaccines up until the latest iteration were all made with these cell cultures. So the vaccines that were being injected into children, into people, contained these cell lines, contained all of the harmful stuff that they put in the petri dish. They're putting antibiotics in this, pretty aggressive antibiotics. Mm-hmm. They're putting cell lines from monkey kidneys, from dogs, from hamsters, from abortive fetal lines.
That's crazy.
These are in the vaccines, all leading all the way up to 2020. Now they changed them slightly with the quote unquote mRNA technology, but leading up to that, every single vaccine on the childhood schedule was made so you were injecting these abortive fetal lines into people. That's horrific. It is really horrific. I mean, it's horrible as a layperson coming into this and kind of scratching away at the surface of of the things that they're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, so we all, I want to have enough time to get through each of the slides, so I'm going to ask you to start taking us through your visuals and explaining.
So the first slide here, you will see is a standard SARS-CoV-2 isolation protocol. So if you just read the column which says viral culture methods, so the cell line, it says Viro. So that's the type of cells that they're using, which is an African green monkey. They couldn't use a human cell line, funnily enough, because they couldn't get it to break down.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's pretty funny in the fact that if you can't get a human cell line to break down in the petri dish, how is it ever actually going to cause you harm in real life? Okay, the monkeys might not be in such good shape because supposedly they can use it to break them down, but not a human. So we use the Viro cells, the Viro E6 cell line, which is just a cell that you buy from a cell bank called the ATCC, which is it's an accredited inventory of scientific produce, and it comes guaranteed that it has not, and it's quite an important point that it's completely blank, so it has no, it can't be contaminated with anything, with viruses, with bacteria, with protozoa, with anything that could change the outcomes.
Okay, can I stop you for a moment? I need you to back up. You work with this every day. We don't. What is this document from? Is this your work, or is this work that has been done before where they claimed they isolated it?
This document is just, I think it's somebody that's put together a spreadsheet. It's not an official document, but it takes all of the official reagents, all the official ingredients used for every single SARS-CoV-2 isolation. Okay. So they've come through. If you look on the left-hand side, there's a link to the peer-reviewed paper. So they've taken every peer-reviewed and published
I see, and done a little
isolation
meta overview,
and logged every single ingredient. It's like a cooking list, right?
Under other relevant findings, they're making statements like they have successfully isolated SARS and whatever. So, okay, I wanted to make sure this wasn't, we weren't going to get confused. This is not your team's work. This is what they lay
No,
out.
no. This is the kind of background of what they're claiming that they're doing.
Okay,
So we're just going to
great.
go through
Yep.
each of these. So they use the monkey kidney cell in mediums and additives. It says cells were seeded with DMEM, which is again, it's like a nutrient, supplemented with 9% FBS, and this is the crucial part. So 9% is used, or 9 or 10 is used to grow the cells to be happy, to be healthy, and the media was changed within 12 hours for inoculation. So that's just putting in the supposed sample.
Sure.
And then the media containing streptomycin. Hold on, I've got something blocking that here. It says
were the antibiotics added in order to rule out bacterial contamination?
Exactly, you've got it in one. So they put antibiotics in, and the interesting thing is that they use a certain type of antibiotic, streptomycin or gentamicin, which is known to be harmful to kidneys. So it does renal damage, but the cell lines that they're using are kidneys. Okay, so the Viro cell is from a kidney of a monkey.
So it's set up. It's set up to cause the damage. Wow.
That's right.
Am I following?
That's right.
Okay.
So underlined in red, you'll see the 1 FBS. So they take it down within 12 hours from inoculation, media containing 1% FBS with the addition of penicillin, streptomycin, and amphotericin. So they've removed the nutrients, they've removed the food.
I see.
From these cells when they're putting the virus in, and that's a very important point that we've found from our study, because what our study does is we take all of these ingredients, these cooking ingredients as they were, we've taken them to a laboratory and said, you take all of these ingredients, you do exactly the same as what they did in the virological isolation of SARS-CoV-2, but you don't put any sample in. So there's no actual test to it. They're not putting any chance of having a virus in these Petri dishes. But we're using the exact same protocol that they're doing. Okay.
Yeah.
And so when these come out, these cells, once you have left them, you put them in an incubator, that you leave them there for about 4 or 5 days, and after the incubation period, you start to notice that the cells are dying, and a virologist will say that they are dying in a very specific way. So if we could move on to slide 2.
Sure, because people are going to say, how do you know they're dying from the virus? And they say, oh, it's the way they're dying that is
correct.
Relative to
That's
viruses.
Right.
But if you can't prove a virus exists, then how can they justify saying, well, that's the way viruses or cells die when viruses injure them or kill them?
That's right.
It's one lie after another.
Correct.
Okay, slide 2 is your side by side, right?
Slide 2 is the
day 3 200 micrometers scale.
It's the day 3 200 micrometers. So
okay.
Here you notice. So this is the side by side. We were talking about FBS. So on the left-hand side, we have 10% FBS where these cells are growing. And if you can notice just the stark difference between these two cells. So on the left-hand side is what's considered a negative control. So something which shouldn't happen. There should be just healthy cells in there because they've been left to grow and left without any sampling. So you can see that they have taken up most of the slide. They look quite uniform. They're all roughly the same shape. They're considered healthy. Compare that to the right-hand side, which is where we did all of the same things that they do in virological isolation. So we lowered that fetal bovine serum. We took away the food.
The food, right? Take it away, right?
And if you look at that, there's maybe 10% of that slide is full up, and the cells that are in there are all of those light parts to it are where they've broken down, they've died, they've rounded, and there's no coherence to them. They're not, you can describe them in any way, that you like. I mean, there are kind of official terms to these things, but just as anybody, and I'm the same, because I had never seen this done, myself before doing, obviously I had seen, plenty of papers and researched them before, but when you actually see them in your experiments, as it were, you kind of you have to observe them as a passive observer and say, okay, well, what do they look like? Well, to compare them between the two, you have about 80% of the entire image filled on the left-hand side, whereas just on the right-hand side, there's about 10%. So where have the cells gone? They've died. And this is with no virus. This is with no possibility of a virus being in there. Now, if a virologist saw those two images side by side, they would say, that one on the right-hand side has a virus in it. And then they would take that and then they would say, we have isolated SARS-CoV-2. There you go. But they can't possibly have done that because it didn't contain any possibility of a virus in there. It didn't contain the sample that was put in there.
What a scam.
If we move on to
and let me just say, so 10% FBS. When you see FBS, I want the audience to think food for cells. So could it be that they died because they were starved to death? Okay, I'm just going to throw that out there as a lay person.
Just for clarification, we have put, and it's in the article write-up that I've done, this lowering of the fetal bovine serum, the starvation of the food, is instructed as part of the UN and World Health Organization. Wow. Because the UN and World Health Organization were the ones that perpetrated 2020. It was top down from them. They gave the orders. That's why every single country around the world that is part of a UN country all had lockdown. They all had these masking measures. They all tried to do lots of things like vaccine passports. I mean, it differed ever so slightly, but in almost lockstep. That's because the UN and the World Health Organization were doing this. And as part of that, we have shown the exact part of their manual where they tell every single virologist to lower or remove this fetal bovine serum down to 1 or 2%. So this is where, the quote unquote conspiracy comes from. But I don't think of it as a conspiracy. People say, they're all in on it. Well, yes, they're being told to do this. They're being instructed to do this, because if you don't remove the food, if you don't remove the fetal bovine serum from these cell cultures, you don't get a virology lab. You're not a virologist. You're not an accredited virologist. You have to follow these protocols, which are producing fraudulent results. So if we move on to slide number 3, we actually go a bit closer into the cells, and we look at the cell line close up. So these two parts that you'll see that have arrows pointed to them are just holes in the cell line. It's called vacuolation, where the cell has just died, and a big hole, like a bullet wound type thing, has opened up in it. And the independent lab that we got to do it, and now I will say that this lab they were working for us. We commissioned them to do the work, but they didn't know what they were doing
or why they were doing it.
So they were blinded. They were blinded to our outcomes. We just told them to take the protocol from these things. We copied the protocol, gave it to them. Obviously, we didn't, take it out of a virology isolation paper. We just took it independent and said, we want to look at something completely different. We just want you to carry out what the virologists do. And then if you could describe these cells. So the independent lab that were blinded to the outcome looked at these and said, well, that is vacuolation. There is a cell dying in a very specific way. And they claim that only happens when a virus is present.
Virologists claim
that
right.
Only
vacuolation, that
it's a bit
hole,
of a tongue
that death hole. It's like a death hole, right?
Exactly.
Only happens. Now, okay, I'm not going to steal your thunder because I'm assuming I'm getting excited for where you guys took this next. Okay, but a virologist who's a fraud, they're all frauds by definition, whether they know it or not, they would say, it's when you see, they were taught and told, when you see vacuolation, the hole forming, that was a viral caused death, correct?
Exactly.
Okay, take it away.
Yeah. So we found in these and this laboratory, again, I reiterate, that had no idea what the aims of this experiment were. They noted 6 out of the 9 what are called CPE. So it's cytopathic effect, which is a pathogen. It's meant to be, and cyto is cell. So this is just the jargon for what is supposedly a specific viral form of death, the way that the cells die. So there are about 9. So there's rounding, so whether the cells just round, does it cincture, plaquing? I mean, all of these are kind of jargon words, but essentially when the cells clump together, or when they round off, or when they parts of them turn a bit granular, it's these are just descriptive measures that are fairly easy to see, and I point these all out in the articles and give you that I've written on this, given you all examples in the experiments that we've had. But
can I give an example for the audience and an analogy? Correct me if I'm wrong. Taking this to a human being who is dying or dies, you have different signs or markers, and that's what the cytopathic effect morphology is. In other words, changes in physicality that show that
I think that's a good way of describing it. Like, you've died from a heart attack, or you've died from
no breath. Turning blue.
Exactly, yes. Suffocation,
Right,
so
but signs. Okay, so go ahead.
At a crime scene, I like that analogy, and I use that type of analogy a lot. When you, and I think, I deal with debunking virology in the same type of way. It's a logical way. You're presented with a dead person on the floor, and how did they come to be unalived, as it were? You are a detective in some capacity, and so
here you're saying they're saying there are 9, 10, maybe 12, maybe 100 like morphologies, in other words, shapes or changes that you could see when a cell dies, and they're saying here, I am stealing your thunder a little bit, I'm sorry. They're saying here, you only need 1 of those, and it's a virus.
That's right.
Okay, so take it from there, because that's what I think I'm reading. What a bunch of dirty dogs, Jamie.
That's right. So yeah, I mean that's slide 4. They only need 1 of these to say that there's a virus present. If just read it off, how many of these CPE morphologies is it generally needed to confirm viral presence in a culture? 1 characteristic CPE morphology. It's as simple as that. And the virologists will quick sharp go, okay, we've seen it. Next, we've isolated it, and then they write, and then it goes out to the world, and then Drosten makes a PCR test on the back of it, and it happened within 24 hours to 48 hours, and that's the reason why they got away with what they got away with, is because at the core of this, they don't ever take you through the necessary science that if you're going to lock 3.5 billion people in their houses and try and stick a poison in them, you've got to make sure that the first steps are pretty rigorous, right? But we have done this without adding any virus and got exactly the same results. And therefore it is fraud. It is junk science that should be, removed. And the reason why this is so important, this step, is because it's the first step. And this might take a little bit of explaining, but I think once people get their head around why it's so important scientifically, it actually, because ultimately we want to, and we have shown, but we want to debunk the PCR test. That's really the kind of cornerstone of everything that's happening and the genetic side of it. But actually, if you come to understand the importance of the very first isolation part, you can actually explain that the rest of it is also debunked. And I'll explain it like this. So,
looks like you've been sleeping well.
Megan, he's back. The My Pillow guy.
And you're looking good.
Still feeling good.
Well, just when you thought it couldn't get any better, we've got the best pillow ever, My Pillow 2.0. When I invented My Pillow, it had everything you'd ever want in a pillow. Well, now there's new technology that makes it even better. My Pillow 2.0 has my patented fill combined with a cooling fabric with temperature regulating thread. My Pillow 2.0 is truly the next generation of My Pillow.
Now's the time to go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use the promo code to save 50% on your My Pillow 2.0.
You're sleeping even better.
And cooler, too.
And you're looking good.
Feeling good.
I knew you would.
mypillow.com.
Why is your managed retirement account still using strategies that haven't changed in over 5 decades? Most IRAs, 401ks, and TSPs are still using the default 60-40 strategy because it benefits corporations, not you. If you have over $100,000 in retirement savings, get instant access to a free 2-minute report from Augusta Precious Metals that reveals how to take control of your financial future in one step. Visit goldwithjane.com today. That's goldwithjane.com, or text Jane, Jane, to 35052 today.
Like this. So if you come to isolate and purify something, it's a very important part when you're talking about a biological entity, because to be able to characterize it, to be able to find it, you need to have a singular thing that it is in the first place. So you need to be able to take the spit. So for instance, a bacteria, you can find and you can isolate and you can see it under a microscope. We know that bacteria exist. You can find them, you can spin them down in a centrifuge until you have all of the same size of bacteria. And then you can look at them under a microscope and you can say they have exactly the same amount of legs or the same size, and you can hold up a vial and say this is a singular bacteria. And so when you have a singular bacteria, you can then say, okay, well, we can develop a test knowing that we only have one thing in the test tube. Okay, does that make sense so far?
It's like the beginning of validating it for validity, that is actually the thing I'm looking for. Because there's only that thing inside. Really. Yeah.
It's only that thing. Okay. So if you are, say looking for a fruit, okay, and you want to develop a test that is for oranges, but you have a basket of fruit, okay, and so you find the orange, you know that it's an orange, you make a test that finds the orange because you can calibrate it, you can benchmark it because you have an orange, okay? If you don't have that orange in the first place, there is no way for you to benchmark and to validate the test, or what's called the gold standard, in the first place. If you, for instance, if you say, okay, the fruit basket is here, okay, but we don't know what fruit it is we want yet. It's a new fruit. We've never discovered it in the middle of the Amazonian rainforest. I don't really know whether it looks like a banana or a pineapple or a star fruit. It could be all of these things, but all we know is it's a fruit, okay? And so a virologist will come in and they will go, okay, well, we've got a fruit basket. Well, if we test this, it kind of looks a bit like an orange. But you can't know because they never actually plucked in and plucked out the orange, the singular thing, in the first place. What they did is they just made it up. They went, okay, well, we think it looks like an orange. We'll test for it's an orange. Okay, it was an orange. We were right. So actually debunking this first isolation part debunks the rest. Because we have shown that they have never had the singular thing, the single purified test, the single purified vial where they go, this is it, and we can benchmark all of the PCR tests, the lateral flow tests, the genomic sequencing, every single other part of it is predicated on the fact that you have a single purified, isolated virus in the first place.
And let me interject something. You just did a beautiful you laid a beautiful foundation, and you did mention Corman and Drosten. And for those people who don't know, in 2020 or 2021, maybe it was 2019, in anticipation of everything that was going to happen, they did what everybody called the gold standard, validating the PCR as a diagnostic test for COVID. But when you really look at first of all, they're frauds because they peer reviewed their own journal, article, and they published it in their own journal. And they did it all in 24 hours. And the rest of the scientific world knew damn well they were lying and they were frauds. But here's the point of the story. If you really do what I tell the audience to do all the time, Jamie, which is try to get yourselves beyond the title, okay? Because the title will take you down. But the inside, even in the first page or two, they admit that what they used for SARS-CoV-2 to validate the PCR is finding it was not a whole isolated SARS-CoV-2 because it didn't exist. But they said we took something from the World Genome Bank that we were told, watch this, was a facsimile of a piece of the SARS. So what Jamie is saying is you've never had the whole thing. Jamie, it's like the mutation argument. I've said to people, why do you talk mutation when you've never seen proof of the whole thing? How can you have a mutation of something that's never been demonstrated to exist? And I thank you for letting me interject that. I think it's a big piece to that.
No,
take it away.
I think it's exactly right to understand, because this is the whole point, is that they managed to get away with it because they just confuse you. They confuse the layman. They want to lock you down based on this science, but they will never actually tell you how they came to be, how they came to find out what they what they claim. And so I think the whole point is about demystifying this process for people. And so when you're talking about, Corman and Drosten, what they're finding is the PCR. So, this is the analogy that I would give to that is that, again, like searching for something, the PCR takes a very, very short part of the genetic sequence, so 20 nucleotides long. So, again, don't want to kind of confuse people too much, so just move it into an analogy. It's a very tiny, minuscule part of something. It's like saying, I have found a hair from somebody or something.
Right.
It could be any animal. It could be anybody. I found a hair.
Yeah.
That's right. And so what Corman Drosten did was say, okay, well, we can identify this thing from a hair, but you've just found a hair, right? You haven't found the person or the animal or the exact thing that it's come from in the first place. You've just gone, okay, well, that hair looks a little bit like other stuff, but
right.
There you go. And that was done within 24 hours.
Yeah.
That was done. Okay, we've got a hair. Oh, it kind of looks a little bit like that. Okay.
The co-conspirators were the governments in lockstep that you referred to earlier. So They all jumped on board, even though a class of world scientists wrote a rebuttal to the Corman-Drosten paper immediately and said, that's not how you do it. You didn't have a whole virus. There's no way. But anyway, but the governments had to be complicit and the military.
Right.
Okay, so... Okay, what do
no,
we?
I mean,
where do we
Sasha
go?
writes very well on this. Sasha Latipova, on the DoD, behind the rollout of this whole thing, it was a military operation, and I largely agree with that. And I think when you see it kind of spread out at the very fundamentals of the science, it's just we've done it, and then the rollout is what it's all about, but it's the project that I'm running is just slowing down, those first 24 hours of going, hold on, are we sure that every I was dotted and T was crossed, to get to this point? And we only really scratched the surface of how bad this is. But
you've done a lot for scratching the surface. Honest to God, I mean, just to bring that out. And then we can bring in the other pieces like the fraud of the Corman-Drosten paper, what they said in there. They actually they confirm what you are saying, Jamie, which is we never had a whole piece. And we didn't even know if we had a piece of that thing.
I mean, it's just as bad with the whole genome sequencing as well. Wu-Fan, which was the version of the supposed whole genome sequence. When they used different computer programs, they got almost completely different results. Up to 50% difference, depending on which computer program they used to assemble the whole genome. So when you hear a lot of the time when people just say, genetics results are 99.999% accurate or whatever. When you actually come to test them, the whole thing falls apart. It's just there's not enough people out there actually challenging, quote unquote, the science at this fundamental basis. So that's what we're doing.
Okay. All right. So where do we go next? Do we go to this? I don't know if you have if there's more to share before we go.
There was one last slide, just to it's the American Society for Microbiology. So again, just to show you that this is all kind of official, that in their textbooks, according to them, we should have an isolated virus in a petri dish that can't possibly contain a virus. So it says listed below are the several general types of CPE. Keep in mind that a given virus may not conform to the norm of its family, or it may produce different CPE and different host cell types. Characteristic CPE is best viewed by daily observation of cultures that have been infected at a low MOI. That's just
what's an MOI in that? I mean, mechanism of, no, but what is an MOI? Is that
it's just the concentration.
Okay, so, it's a pharmacokinetic parameter. Okay, okay.
Yeah. The best knowledge of viral CPE comes from experience, and control uninfected cells should always be observed to distinguish normal cell changes that occur as cell ages from a cytopathic effect. In general, the rule of thumb is that a virus is considered slow if CPE appears after 4 to 5 days in cultures inoculated at low MRI, and rapid if CPE appears after 1 to 2 days. So here is the entire, American Society for Microbiology, the people, the organization who oversee every single viral isolation and protocol, along with the Clinical Laboratory Standards Institute. And there they are saying that if you receive any CPE within 4 to 5 days, then you have a virus in your culture. And if it's within 1 to 2 days, and we did receive that, so within 24 to 48 hours, we saw these specific viral morphologies, and so we even have a fast-acting virus in our dish, in our culture. So I mean, the CPE that we saw was, and we cross-referenced this against, a lot of people ask about what's called the positive control. So did we do this with a virus and show that they're exactly the same? Well, yes, we showed, and we cross-referenced every single paper, virus isolation paper, and showed side by side that the morphologies and the exact amount were the same. So
which means you uncovered broader fraud in the virology and general scientific community. Jamie, I know, I've been watching your social media since the first interview because you are putting out a lot of educational material. I mean, on this to continue to, you're taking the slings and arrows. You're, like we all are out there, from the ignorant, ankle biters who don't even know what they're criticizing. But if people will pay attention, you're really putting out a lot of educational pearls, filling in the gaps of understanding so that people understand what you're doing and I guess the scope of the fraud that you and your team are unveiling. So Jamie, as we look at the unveiling really of the depth and the breadth of the crimes, you haven't even, like you said earlier, we've just scratched the surface, but you've actually done enough so far, at least to get the attention of the public, in a good way, so that when this happens again, and something's going to happen again, it might not be exactly the same thing, but they still are, operating on the premise, the lie that viruses exist. And I know you've said a lot in your social media about viruses not existing in the natural world. I respect that because you're in there doing the work with your team. I don't have an argument for viruses or against it. I want to make that really clear. And the reason I'm saying that is because I get a lot of ignorant ankle biters, trolls, accusing me online of, why don't you just come out and say there's no virus? Well, first of all, I'll say what I want to say when it's proper. And I'm a scientist myself. I work on the empirical method, replicability, being able to replicate what somebody does. Your work and your team's work is 100% replicable. And people have to understand that's one of the markers of gold standard science, of real science. So with all that said, this is going to, we have people out there like Robert Malone, who claims he's a virologist, and, other people like Peter McCullough. These were frontline doctors who are beloved and famous. And McCullough always talks about mutations of SARS and, about these viruses. And they either don't know what they're talking about. And like you said, they've been told by their virology, societies, you better do it this way, and you better, or they're part of the crime. Eventually, they can't rest on ignorance. They have to face the fact that they are now enabling a crime on humanity. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
There's lots of vested interests, all of these people, if they come from, the establishment, have to have been, indoctrinated in the first place. And, the person that I've grown very close to is Dr. Mike Yeadon. So he he has those establishment credentials. He actually worked in the Pfizer lab in the same city in the UK as to where I moved from before I was in France, in Canterbury, in Kent. That's the European headquarters of Pfizer, and he was head of infectious diseases. So not a small position to take. And also within, the exact area that we're talking about. And after a lot of discussion with him, both members of the research team that I have and myself personally, he's come around over the last few years to actually say, no, I don't think that viruses do exist. He's noted He's noted that he recognized the experiments that we were doing. He said, "Oh, I remember those, from when I worked at Pfizer. That I was getting a lot of the lab techs to do for me, and so I recognized that what you're doing is correct." And it's taken a little bit of time to kind of break down that indoctrination, but now he will openly say, I don't think that viruses do exist, and I don't think that they've been isolated. And so, it's incumbent on people whom want to know and want to find out the truth for themselves. There are obviously lots of people whom still have those vested interests, that will never break those molds
Yeah.
because their paycheck depends on it. You get that all the time on Twitter, for instance, people that just need to have the virus, maybe because they have shares in Pfizer. It's really that simple, right?
Yeah. I want to say that, yes, Dr. Michael Yeadon, I started working with early on in 2020. And that led me to Sasha Latipova, Craig Partacooper, How Bad Is My Batch, the Team Enigma, if you remember all that. And I have the greatest respect for him. Unequivocal, never compromised, never took the big corporate money, and could have, believe me. So shout out to Dr. Michael Yeadon. I'm glad you're connected with him because he is integrity and he is honesty and he is brilliant. And yes, he comes with those credentials. So for him to kind of validate, and for him to see the fraud that you're uncovering, this is what has opened his eyes. So
that's right.
Do you do any work or communication with, there's sort of a band of experts that everybody keeps pushing away. I've never had the pleasure of interviewing them, but, the Baileys, Dr. Mark Bailey, his wife, Dr. Bailey also, and Dr. Kaufman. Gosh, I hope Dr. Cowan. I know there's a great group of, they're not grifters. They don't get involved in, selling things. They're really trying to educate people. But yours is...
Well, as part of that group was Dr. Stefan Lanka, and they go right the way back to the HIV days. So he learned from a lady called Eleni Papadopoulos-Eliopoulos. There are lots of people that are involved that have figured this out. And Dr. Stefan Lanka was really what these control studies, so the way of looking and debunking this, he ran those in 2020. He also ran them in 2016 as part of a court trial because he had a he gave out €100,000 prize for anybody that could prove the existence of measles. And
wow.
Yeah, exactly. So somebody tried to get that prize money, presented 6 papers, took him to court. They won on the first court appearance, and then Stefan Lanka won on the second court appearance. And the official title from, and it went as far as the Supreme Court of Germany, is the official notes from the unanimous decision was that there was no singular paper that proved the existence of the measles virus. So, there have been lots of people ongoing in the background. It just needs to break into the general public. This
was my next question to you. Why haven't we stopped it? With the great work of people you just mentioned, your own team, why haven't we stopped it yet?
Yeah, I just think it's incumbent. We're going, as with everybody, we're going up against the entire system, and it's the same thing. Is that people will say, well, why aren't you trying to get it peer reviewed? Get your work peer reviewed and published. Well, it's a kind of a protectorate cult. It's a protectorate system where if you try and be a part of it, it's like being a politician or whatever. Oh, I'm just going to be a politician so that I can undo it from the inside. And it never really works like that.
No, it doesn't.
A lot of people, try and kind of get involved to kind of undo it from the inside and then bring it down. And I think what we need, and it's a state versus the people problem, really. Fundamentally, all of these things, whether it's virology, whether it's climate change, whether it's, the gender woke, thing, any of these problems are all state created. And really, at the heart of it, it is kind of the people versus the state. And so I think that the people have infinitely more power than a few of these people who are controlling these things. And it's just incumbent on people to make the right steps. And they may seem small, and people just want to go, put them all in prison and let's, be kind of, whereas I think that it's better to take small, and I think that we will get there. but you have to take small steps rather than go marching in through the doors, rather than the kind of, January 6th, we'll storm the White House or whatever, because that's where they want you. That's where they want you, is to take those drastic actions. Whereas it's more like a kind of a steady, slow progress. But those things are in exactly the right way to kind of bring it down. I mean, ultimately, if I had all of the answers, that's my opinion. I think people education and people realizing their power is a much greater thing, and it's not going to happen overnight, but we can certainly make sure that those first 24 hours, 48 hours, when they try and do the same thing, immediately people go, well, I've seen that those tests that you're rolling out test positive with vodka, so I ain't taking one. And it puts a spanner in the works, because as long as history, as long as the word keeps getting out there and it doesn't get kind of whitewashed or people forget or anything like that. So that's my way forward anyway.
What are some of the next steps? I mean, I know you and your team are way ahead. You've got a lot going on, and I'm not asking for, secrets or anything yet. So we're definitely going to be doing this. It's going to just become a natural series of updates with you and your team and anybody else you recommend. But for now, you're our leader in this, in terms of getting this information back over to us. You're interfacing with your team, and then now you're outward facing. We're like getting this very valuable information. But so what's next? Just additional proof of the fraud. Like, now you're going to get into that PCR and show on the same level that you did introductorily with this antigen test, and just keep laying out the fraud, so that people are, because people don't go ahead. Sorry.
No, of course. The way that I see that, the unpicking of this can be done. I work with quite a few lawyers. I work with quite a few financiers as well, and we're trying to pick away at the best path to challenge the establishment with the results that we have. And so in background, and I can't say too much for legal reasons,
Fair enough.
We are working with legalers, with legal teams, to put together a case and to put together a few cases based on the results that we have. And so it's pulling in people that are motivated and driven, and it's not just in a legal capacity, it's not just in a financial capacity, it's in any capacity, because lots of people bring lots of different things to the table. And so I'm here just managing and being the go-between of these things, but lots of people have come with lots of different ideas, just either whether that be marketing and getting the word out, because I can only be on one podcast at a time, right? It's different until I can clone myself. It's the power is in the people, and so that's why we've open sourced all of the results that we have. And so it is totally possible for anybody to take these results and say that they are their own. Okay, because we've open sourced them, and I've checked with lawyers, I've checked with the legal team that's involved in this project, and they've clarified that anybody can take these results, they can repurpose them, they can print them off, they could put them, do their own write-up, come to their own conclusions, and take them to their local councillors, take them to local council meetings, take them to pin them up on a cork board, take them to any sort of live meeting, take them to your local doctor if they try and want to try and force you into having, childhood vaccination. It can be disseminated in any way, and it is there as a protectorate, for for you to know your rights and to know that it is all based on fraud. So when people in a hospital setting, or a pediatric setting are trying to get you to do these things, that these, you have some defense behind you.
Good point.
So really, it's a kind of, you can print all this stuff off, you can take all of the data, it's all for free, and you can do with it what you want. And when you understand the power of it, you can really use it to your own benefit, to protect yourself and your children.
Very good point. And to that end, because we are going to wrap up with you, we know you have a lot of work to do. So you said it's all accessible, you have it open. Let's review for people, like we did in the first interview, where they can find, and dig in and start to read your work, your team's work. Where do we go?
It's all up on Substack, so substack.com/control studies. I write articles around the topic. I put one out about once every week. All of the experiments are up there. We've done 2 experiments. There's also video of the laboratory that carried them out. So they've taken as much, way more detail than a standard scientific paper would do, just so that you can see that it happened for yourself. So I release all of that on there. Amazing. I'm also on Twitter. If you just want to shoot the breeze, that's less less formal, but just come and ask me a question.
Yep. And we've got both the Substack and your Twitter handle up with you on the screen, and it has been throughout the show. So check out those 2. The Substack is such a rich repository. Anything else that where people can interact or just, I don't know if you...
I am on Instagram, but I rarely use it. The platform's fine, but it's not really kind of conducive to long format writing or a little bit of detail. I put some memes up on there every now and again.
Jamie, you're a bit of a political warrior too, because you're into the mimetic warfare, and you've got the little ways to dig the criminals, and I just love it. A combination with your seriousness about the right kind of science.
Well, thank you. You too, Ruby.
Special. Yeah. Yeah, it's really special. Any last words that you want to leave the audience with? We will, if you're willing, and I believe you are, love to have you back. Just, like I do with Sasha, who just keeps discovering and putting together the case. Any other final words or thoughts for the audience?
Just don't be shy to reach out to me. I have had so many people just say, I don't really know. Could I bother you with this? I've done this. Could you look at this? Or could you, what do you think of this? Or, I'm having trouble, fighting off people with, please just reach out to me. Just, because the more people that come on board, the better it is for everybody. And I think it's I'm approachable, and as long as you're being rational and not being sneaky, I talk to anybody. 5 followers on Twitter with no, they're some of the best people that I've had long-lasting relationships with, that are just working along in background, because the 50 researchers that are involved in the project are all anonymous. They have no social media presence, and they are really the engine behind this, digging through on the daily all of this research. And so I'm really just the front of house, the pretty face, I guess. Please do reach out to me for whatever you think that you can bring to the table.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank God they don't have to face all of this out here, that they can focus on the work. But thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for staying in touch and all the educating.
Thank you, Dr. Ruby, for giving me the platform and letting us educate your viewers.
Oh yeah, they're used to the truth in medicine because they know will empower them. But you actually characterized that quite well before. So Jamie, thanks again. We will see you the next time, and we're going to run this quite a bit over the next week or two. We're going to try to catch people and make sure they see it. And good luck out there in Twitter. I'll try to have your back as much as possible.
Thank you. Yeah, you too.
All right. Thanks, Jamie. Have a good day.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Ruby. You too.
Bet.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, that's it for this edition of the Dr. Jane Ruby Show. Thanks for joining me tonight. This series with Jamie Andrews is just unbelievably eye-opening. It's what we've needed for the last couple of years, and it's an incredible compliment to the body of work put together by Sasha Latapova, Catherine Watt, legal analyst, Sasha, the business and pharma analyst, Dr. Michael Yeadon, and Craig Partacooper, How Bad Is My Batch, with Sasha, and a few others out there. They're not necessarily all connected. Dr. Daniel Nagase, who was the first person, molecular biologist and former emergency room physician, who actually called attention to the fact that there's some dirty stuff going on here and they've damaged the human genome. There's just so much to this, but the more people we educate, the more people we inform, and clear up and kind of clarify for, Jamie's right. The more we will get people into a strong base that will not allow this horrific crime against humanity to continue. I wish you all a peaceful evening and a great good night. We will see you next time for either the Dr. Jane Ruby Show or your favorite, The Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody. God bless.